this is a strange new world we find ourselves in, and I know it can be quite disruptive for a lot of us. I know that a lot of us still have assignments, and we have various things, and we're kind of participating in different classes as well. So what we really wanted to do with this is, because of course we can't meet in person as we've been used to doing, we've taken this idea to do a little webinar series over the next number of Thursdays, the Thursdays in April, and with that we're building towards a digital showcase. So a number of you may have been participants in last autumn's physical showcase. This is going to be a little bit different and probably not as involved, so don't worry. The things we might be suggesting you do, it can be as big or as small as you want it to be, because it's really about kind of having a activity to focus us and to once again do that piece around showcasing our talent and ability in different ways. And I suppose this presentation today is going to address how we can really leverage kind of creativity and talent during times that are quite difficult. So there's a couple of examples. I'm going to structure the session into 3 parts. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the digital showcase. Second of all, I'm going to talk about storytelling. A number of you might have been at my previous storytelling session that I did back in late summer last year, but it'll be some of that, but it'll be kind of in a different context. And then I'm going to talk to you about creativity and like a broad range of creativity. So that's innovators in business, that's poets, that's artists, and just how people in the past, I suppose a few examples of people have leveraged tough situations to really be creative. I might just ask my teammates, my not so different teammates, just that to make sure that my recording is coming across strongly and that you can hear me. You might just message in the chat box to make sure that I'm able to be understood, that my microphone isn't accidentally turned off or anything. Okay, great. Super. So I just want to start us with a little bit of an exercise. So I love this little graphic. I just found it online. So I wanted to take a moment to think about a time where you felt proud and happy, and just really take us back to that moment in time and just sit with it for a moment. So just think about what that was, how you're feeling at the time, and I just want everybody to take 1 minute, just kind of maybe even just close your eyes, just get relaxed and just kind of think that time that I was proud of myself and happy, and let's just hold that thought for a couple of seconds. Okay, great. So I think it's important just to say to use these little techniques to kind of keep ourselves in a good way during challenging times. So let's start off. So what's this digital showcase we're talking about all about? So as I say, there's a lot happening right now, but we can use creativity to show that even in challenging times, we can find creative ways to have a positive impact. So therefore, over this month of April, we'll be working with you to develop this digital showcase, and really ways that can kind of channel some creativity. And as well, I think what's really important is to, with this, we want to send a message to others. So those people in the not so different network, those partners, those businesses, that we can kind of say, look, we work with a great gang of people, and it's been tough times around, and yet out of that they're still kind of working on things, they're still focusing on their own development, they're still focusing on careers and aspirations and all that thing. So I think that's a really hopeful message to send to people. So in this first webinar, it'll be the intro to the digital showcase, and we'll be talking about storytelling and creativity. In next week's webinar, that will be with Adrienne, who some of you may have met previously. She'll be focusing on self-talk and how we can better leverage that. And I'll bring up a description of that particular session at the end of this one. In the third webinar, which is on the 16th of April, we'll be doing From Idea to Reality. So there's kind of some really practical steps and ways of taking an idea you might have and working it and turning it into something. So that's something that's often used maybe in a business context. So you've got an idea and then you turn it into a product. Or in a story context, you kind of might have that sort of plan, that story you want to tell, and then there's some practical steps we can take. And it will apply to anything really where you're making something, really. So when you're creating or showing your talent. Then in the fourth webinar, we'll be doing personal development again with Adrienne. And then the final webinar was back with myself. So that's showcasing in a digital world, because it is something that's obviously been happening for a while, but in this particular context, we'll be looking at kind of how we can show our talents and show ourselves better. The ways we'll support you, so basically we'll help you to come up with or adapt maybe an idea to showcase your ability and creativity. I've given some really broad themes here, and I know there's been some questions around, as in how much do I need to stick to kind of hope, strength, peace, and creativity. You don't. So basically, these words, we might kind of work with you to kind of see how you can link maybe something you're working on to these themes, but really, I wanted these to be quite broad. It's more about sending a positive message. So basically looking at kind of positive aspirations, and that's kind of inherently the way in I remember like a lot of the projects that were in the last showcase, they were all very positive, very hopeful. So we'll use those as broad themes, but don't be worried if you kind of look at those themes and think, oh, how am I going to link to that? It's flexible. You can also choose a broad format in terms of the ways your ideas will take. It could be something like a sketch, short animation, poem, could be a business plan for a new idea, could be an essay, could be anything really. So I want everyone to feel like they've got whatever background we're from, because we're from quite a diverse range of talents and skills and abilities. So I want people to feel like they can really kind of bring their creative ability to this idea. We'll also work on a kind of, I suppose, what we call a digital storyboard. So once again, previously we kind of did a little board to kind of capture your idea. We'll do something similar online. So basically, in the next slide, I'll kind of talk to you what those kind of little things will be. And I say we'll provide these webinars to support you with that, as well as ongoing support from the team. So remember that we're here, and we're here to chat, we're here to support, and it's going to be, I'm looking forward to this. So it'll be basically in the format of a mini site, the digital showcase. So it'll be a mini site hosted on notsodifferent.ie. Plan is for the second week of April, we'll probably put that out. So we've got 5 weeks, and once again, I know you're all busy, so it could be a case of adapting something you're working on for your college projects as it is, something you've worked on in the past, or some new idea as well. And we'll support you on this journey, don't worry. So within each kind of page about your the project you're doing, that'll be, it'll have your name, your title. So once again, what we're looking for here is kind of those words like, as in, we're all storytellers, we might be entrepreneurs, we might be photographers, we're a whole broad range of things. So I want you to kind of think about what words you associate with yourselves. So basically, as in it could be businessman, it could be architect, it could be anything. So once again, just over the next while, we'll be kind of thinking about kind of those titles that we want to associate with ourselves. We'll also ask you to describe your passion, we'll ask you to describe your project, and we'll ask you to describe your future. So what are your aspirations for yourself and your career? Those of you who have been through this process for the previous showcase might kind of look at the previous ones and update it based on where you are now. Super. And there'll be questions now. I'll give room for questions after. Oh, sorry. Questions now. So if anybody has any questions, will you pop them in the little chat window for me there? Looks like we're okay for questions on this one, are we? Okay. And you can always come back. I'll make sure that basically if there's anything that you have queries, so you can direct any queries to the team, or you can, and they can forward anything on to me, and we'll make sure that if there's anything afterwards that you have a question about or thought about, you just let us know, okay? So we're going to hop straight into storytelling. Storytelling and creativity, and as they, So, sorry, there is some question there. So basically, so Daniel, you're asking how long will the digital showcase be running for? So basically, we'll have it up on our site. So it's something that we'd probably maybe send the link around to, so people can that can view it, and kind of like almost like a portfolio link of everybody here. So it won't be kind of like a single event. It'll just be a hosted little kind of mini website, and that'll show the other projects off. Does that answer your question, Daniel? Great. And Adam, so what will be your creativity process? Great question. And I suppose we'll be taking, I'll be covering a little bit around, I suppose, the inspiration of creativity in this session. And in my next webinar in 2 weeks, we'll be kind of getting into some process around it, but I will send out some links beforehand. So without getting too technical, I'm a big fan of some of what's called the Stanford D, the design school, and that has some great models around how you look at kind of your ideas, and then, because it is that hard thing around, I've got an idea, but how do I turn it into something? So if it'll be useful, I'll send out a couple of links. We'll be posting the video from this tomorrow, and with that I'll send some links that might guide the creative process. And then we'll get more into that creative process and how we can refine and define things in the next session. Is that okay, Adam? Okay. Great. So if there's no other questions, I'm just going to jump into the storytelling and creativity piece. Okay, great. Thanks, Adam. Super. So I want to start off a little bit with myself. Some of you know me, some of you don't. So I'm from Cork, where I started working as a journalist, studied psychology, and then changed path towards becoming really, as a journalist and filmmaker was my thing. So I was kind of thinking about, becoming a psychologist for a while, and then I thought, no, the journalism thing, I was using it to support myself in college, but it's what I really like. So I decided to up sticks from Cork, move to Dublin, and study a master's in film production. And I probably could not have chosen a worse time. That's what I was thinking at the time. Because just as I was about to graduate, it was the Great Recession. The world changed entirely. When I was in the course, as in we all had sort of jobs lined up that we were meant to be going into straight after, but that all disappeared. And it was a really tough time. And I remember thinking, God, as in, what am I going to do now? But interestingly, out of that really challenging experience, I got this incredible opportunity, which was I got to start working with social organizations, nonprofits, and I ended up in a space where my creativity was given greater opportunity and a chance to create with people and for people. And I made that leap. Even as things started to get better, I was like, you know what? This is challenging, but it's worth it. And I think back now, if that challenge had never occurred, if that recession had never happened, I wouldn't have had that amazing opportunity to look at myself, to look at others, and to make a leap into a wonderful new world for myself. And since then, I've travelled around the world. I've been to up and down west and east coast of Africa. I've been to India. I've done projects and creative projects in places that I could never have anticipated before, helping people raise their voices. And once again, coming back to it, I think about the fact that if it hadn't been for that, I would have been on a completely different path. So it was that moment of challenge that allowed this strange new creativity for myself, and I'm quite happy that happened. It's always difficult. The challenges we face, they are tough, and it's tough right now, but basically we can see how we might be able to find our way through that and into a better tomorrow, hopefully. There's the power of words, I find. As I say, next week, Adrian will be talking more about self-talk, but I want to kind of touch around the power of words and how we tell our story. Oftentimes, we connect words to ourselves that might be negative. Or they might be positive, or they might be all sorts of different words. So when we think about our story, and we might, if you have a pen and paper to hand, or if you have a notepad on your computer, or if you just want to think about it for yourself, what words would we want to feature in our story? If somebody was describing us, if you wanted somebody to kind of come along and write, Sam, the words I attached to him, what 3 words would those be? And maybe do it for yourself. You don't have to do that right now, but if you take a moment, maybe just have a think about those words, those adjectives, those things that you'd like to say, that's me, you know? And those will wind into our story. For instance, for myself, the words I like to think about are creative, hopefully, adaptive, sort of responding to different scenarios. And the third word I'd pick for myself, I hope, is kind. Because I think kindness is important in this world right now, but also in general. So creative, adaptive, kind. So I take that moment and think, how do those words feature into the story that I would tell about myself? So I say I'll put a note into the PowerPoint that goes up afterwards. That basically that's something good to start thinking about for yourselves. Then let's get into a little bit of the storytelling mode. What is the classic story arc? You'll see a little graphic there to the side around kind of the phases. So obviously stories are all about building. So you've got your opening scene, then you've got a series of oftentimes crisis in some of the classic stories we tell, which builds up to a climax, and then that sort of resolution. You'll see that in a lot of the films, video games, novels, stories, but it's more universal than that. This is kind of the mode and manner of our storytelling that's been built up over thousands of years. The story is as human as humans themselves, you know. We look at kind of what's in your story, as in like what's in all of our stories. So when we start to tell it, you know, we look first at, I suppose, things like the exposition. We need to familiarize people with something. So we've got the context to who we are, we've got where we're from, we've got various aspects of the world we exist in. And then oftentimes in our story comes along a conflict, a challenge, something that pushes us, something that creates that tension in our story. And then from there we see kind of the what we call that rising action, the actions being taken. So this is how we take a challenge and we address it in a story. So we think about, you know, in Lord of the Rings, the great war scenes, the fast-paced movement. We see, you know, in other stories, we see political conflict. We see things building up, and that's all about action in that moment, following conflict and following challenge. And that builds up to a climax. And I suppose the climax in a story is the pivoting point. So that's when you've built up and you've gotten to a point of potential drama. It's a tough moment. But then from there, we see this kind of falling action. Things begin to fall into place from that point, and resolution. Resolution being this new thing that after we've had that conflict and climax, we're in a new world. You'll see that if you start to look at, and maybe take an opportunity to do that in your favourite works of fiction. You'll see that storytelling mode is quite universal. Some people play with it. You can play with the moment of climax. You can play with the falling action. It might bounce back up again, but in general, we'll see this format. And I say, how do we apply that to the stories we tell of ourselves? I mean, the great fiction works have very dramatic settings, and they've got monsters to fight, and they've got villains, and they've got superpowers. But in our own story, we have, I suppose, our own superpowers and our abilities that we tap into to address that challenge and to build to that climax and to achieve that new resolution. Just going to wait for my PowerPoint to move on. So basically, we talk about, and particularly when I studied filmmaking, we talked about the 3-act structure, and that is kind of, and I know it might sound like I'm repeating myself here a bit, but it is important to kind of know this. So it's that beginning, middle, and end, and we can start really to applying that to ourselves and our own stories. So beginning, once again, is that exposition, the inciting incident. Middle is the rising action, crisis and climax, and end is that falling action. But I like to put this into lots of different framings. So When I talk to social issues, when I'm working with them around, so I'll come back to your question in just a moment, Joanne. Um, so when we talk about social issues, we look at kind of the problem. What is the problem people are addressing? What is the solution they bring? And what is the proof that is working? I'm just reading that now for a moment. Yes, so Joanne just asked a really good question there. Can you put your experience as a story of the things that you did and the skills you gain? Absolutely. So let's think about just that in this framing. So your story might be where you were at the beginning. So maybe that's kind of like what, we always ask the question: why did we take the actions, or why did we do these things? So we want to hear a little bit at the beginning around the why. As in where was I? I didn't take an action just for no reason. There has to be that kind of logic behind it. So I found, for instance, for myself, as in I maybe in the wanted to be a filmmaker, and as in I really wanted to tell stories, and I needed kind of something to help me tell stories. So then I did something, which was to go for that course, get that master's, which kind of gave me those skills exactly. And then on the other side, I'm kind of using those skills and doing the work. So that's kind of a three structure there. Does that make sense, Joanne? Great. Okay. So once again, in this trek structure, again, we have, let's say, background, journey, and kind of that hope at the end, or sort of what we call the original world. So where we were, world of discovery, which is that middle phase, and that learning and that doing, and that new world, the world we find ourselves in. So even in this current climate, what I would say is like the original world, as in if we think kind of 6 months ago how the world worked, and now we're in that world of discovery around kind of, as in, okay, there's some troubling things, happening out there, but also we're all sort of figuring out how to learn, use new technologies. Like as in here, I've never done a webinar before. I know how to work a camera, but as in webinars was a bit tricky for me. Um, but the new world, I'll have that skill and I'll be able to do things. And maybe now I can, as in do webinars for people in other countries. So once again, that original world, that world of discovery, and that new world is all around. That's the experience we're in now. So we're in that world of discovery in this current moment, and we just have to look about what skills can we build, what are we gaining, what perspectives we're maybe learning about the importance of kindness, and then in this new world arrive in, after all that challenge, we'll be able to better express kindness to others. That's my hope, anyway. So we'll kind of, I can send on other examples around this story structure, but that is what you always need to think about. Boil it down to it is basically there's that first phase, your beginning, your context, the where you were, the why you wanted to initiate something, that middle, and as you see, that middle is the big piece. It's that part where you're changing, you're learning, you're challenged, you're struggling, you're doing, you're rising. And then we build up to that climax, that moment where things maybe pivot, and then you're kind of in that as in you've done the thing, and you get to, as in you've built the product, you've slayed the dragon, and basically you're in that world of realization and newness. Um, and I think really creative and innovation, like everything is a story. And this is the thing, people kind of think you're only a storyteller if you're making movies or you're writing books. No, we're all storytellers. I work with a lot of organizations and companies. They all have their individual story, and I get this amazing privilege where I get to sit down with, and I've sit down with some of you, which has been brilliant, and hear your stories, and they're absolutely incredible because, like, as in, we all have that story inside us, and I think when we take a moment to step back and do our own storytelling, we begin to unlock something for ourselves that we can be really proud of. It's that moment where you see that you've been on a journey, that everything is a journey, and that you kind of try and capture it and write it down for yourself. Because I think sometimes we get lost in that moment of always kind of doing, moving forward, but to to put your story into words, or to kind of look at what you've been doing in your college work or anything like that as a story of kind of where you were, the things you've learned and what you can do now, that's also what we can relate to others. So when we think about trying to connect to further education opportunities, or to employment, or to other kind of people that we might be interacting with, being able to have that story, knowing that story, we can tell that to others, and they can then be witness to what we have achieved or what we have done. And I think there's a quote that I love, and that's those who tell the stories rule society. And it's by Plato, who's kind of one of the fathers of storytelling in the Greek tradition. But those who tell the stories rule society, it's never been more true than as the moment we find ourselves in. I mean, you can hear it in the negative way around stuff like fake news, but you can see it in kind of the stories that enrich the world as well. I mean, all of the communication and work that's happening at the moment, those are all stories convincing people to take certain actions or to relate to the good things that are happening. And that lifts and draws us together. And in our own small societies, tell the stories, and you bring a certain power to your presence within your family, your group of friends, your communities online, but really as well just yourself, as in, tell that story and you find power in that, and we are able to share our power with others, because we all have that. A little exercise, not to be done right now, but what I want you to maybe take, it's not something, I don't want you to send me anything, I just want you to maybe take a moment to look at this for yourselves. So think of a time you faced a challenge and you overcame it, and so I want you to kind of break it down to 3 again, always rule of threes. Describe that situation that you were in, what was the challenge and how did it make you feel at the time. Then look at the action you took. Who helped you? Who were the supporting characters? And then how did you face it? And then describe what things were like after. What was the result and how did you feel in the end? And I think a big thing is, when we think of our stories, make them rich. Use adjectives. Bring out the senses, the sights, the sounds, the feelings. Place yourself and those reading maybe in that moment, and that really helps to build connection. And I suppose storytelling at the end of the day is about building connection, once again, whether that might be for yourself to a past experience or to others to your experience. I might just take a moment now, just before I move on to the next section, just to take any questions about the storytelling piece. And once again, if you don't have any questions right at this moment, feel free to send them on afterwards, and what I can do is put kind of additional links or clarifications in what we post up afterwards. So I might just move on to the next section, which is about creativity in adversity. Once again, creativity almost always exists in some form of adversity. The greatest ideas, the greatest innovations, the greatest works, they've come out of something, as in they've been a response. Creativity is a response, and innovation follows needs. Oh, I might actually just pause there and just answer. So Daniel's just asking the question, when it comes to telling stories about real world struggles, how do you usually frame those things? So I'm just going to interpret your question a little bit. So basically, so that might be our own personal struggles in the world. So I think it's just kind of sit with that moment and kind of think. Now, you can do it as kind of a narrative of yourself, or else you might take the inspiration from that, and because oftentimes it can be, maybe tricky to kind of speak in our own personal language or describe our personal circumstances. So you might use that, as in a lot of people kind of create, obviously, fiction from their real lived experiences. So once again, I think just trying to find ways of that real world struggle, as in situation find in, write it down and kind of create a basis. So write down the real world piece in terms of that, the challenge you faced, the actions you took, and how things were differently afterwards. but that kind of gives you a foundation to maybe take that narrative and build things up. Okay, yeah, I'll actually go back to that. Thanks. I will just kind of describe. I can't pronounce your name there, but I'll Zozig. Just asked to use this framework. Zwazik. Thank you. To use this framework for myself. So basically, I'll take just an example. So if I was to describe a situation and what was the challenge and how do you make it feel, so I would step back recently to, for instance, when there was actually a burglary in my office, and it was an unpleasant experience. But basically, I remember I was walking in that morning. I was the first one to go into my office, and I opened the door and I walked in and I saw that everything was in disarray. And this was a place that, it's a place we've built up. It's our office as a community, and it just was such a hurt to me that somebody had come in and broken things and thrown everything everywhere. And I felt in shock. I kind of took that moment, and I remember my breath was heavy, and I was like, this is the world we built for ourselves, this is the community we built ourselves, and it all looked ruined in that moment, and I was just so distressed. And then we did take action. So I picked up that phone, I phoned my colleagues, and we said, we've got to do something here. We phoned the guards, and the guards came in. We built that network around us of of those good people that that gave me faith in humanity, and we kind of started to pick up the pieces. We started putting the books back in place. We started to clean up broken things. We started to vacuum. And everybody was moving, and everyone is acting together. And we faced that challenge, and we rebuilt that environment. And then what things were like after was that things had changed. We'd had that intrusion, but our community rallied together, and the result was that we were stronger because of it. We took that challenge and we faced it, and through that solidarity, we were together, and and they caught, and on the sidelines they did catch the people who did it, which is great as well. But that sort of example of a story, is that something that does that, using that structure, make sense in what I just said? Great, okay. And once again, that's the sort of thing you can do. So to use, once again, reflecting. So once again, you'll see in the way that I spoke there that I kind of used those points, those 1, 2, 3, where it was in that initial experience and how awful it was, the things we did, with the rallying together, the supporting characters, my colleagues, and then how things were like different afterwards, because we were stronger for it, and we are stronger for it. So I'm going to move on just to the creativity and adversity again. So here, once again, that notion that almost always creativity and innovation is responding to things. Innovation always follows needs. We wouldn't create kind of the interesting new technologies and the apps if there wasn't a problem to be addressed. We see that right now. We see all these new ways of doing things that are coming out of a problem that we didn't have previously. So now we're trying to figure out, how do we connect online? And somebody's kind of going, oh, I have an idea. I have something that I can do in this space that can kind of do something. Or even we're seeing people around us that maybe are feeling a bit down and stuff like that. So you think, well, you know what? I'm going to come up with a new song. I'm going to write a new song on my guitar and play it for them, and that's going to bring a smile to their face. Like, isn't it? It's always a notion of responding. So it's as with our stories when we're creating. It's looking at that context, that problem and that challenge, and understanding it, that then sets us up for the actions we can take. So there's kind of a logic, there's kind of one to the other. So there's the context, the problem, and then there's how we address it. And it's in that addressing that creativity finds. And this is where we create meaning as well. We create something new that provides something for people. And it always does. creativity doesn't happen in a vacuum. We're either, if we're creating for ourselves, we're doing something that impresses us. If we're creating for others, we're trying to make them feel something, to move them, to provide them with a solution. That's kind of the manner and method of creativity. I'm just going to choose three little examples of people who kind of created and are famous for creating in adversity. So one of my all-time favourite poets is Allen Ginsberg. So he came of age in the post-war era after World War II. It was a time that there was a lot of strange things happening. He's from the United States, and it was known as the Lost Generation. His generation was kind of floundering, and he himself suffered from exceptionally terrible mental health difficulties, and he was lost. But then it was his poetry. That was his outlet, and that was his power. So he wrote incredible works. I won't get into them now. They're quite big. They're quite elaborate. They've been the subject of lawsuits. He changed the law in the US around things. But basically, his poetry was very impassioned and very, very creative, and it was dark and it was interesting, but it was powerful. And so around him and his poetry and his creativity came the Beat Generation, which was other writers who joined them, and they started creating works of, the road novels about people going on incredible journeys and people who were very diverse, and and it was in responding to this time of the lost generation. And they decided that they weren't going to be lost anymore, that they would use their poetry and they would create things. And so out of that, they actually became the inspiration for what would go on to become the hippie movement, the peace movement of the 60s. So once again, coming from that point of deep, the name of the who was assessed there is Allen Ginsberg, and once again it'll be in the document afterwards. So he was just that was just kind of a remarkable example, and it really, really changed things, and he became one of the most well-known poets of the 20th century. But he said it himself, like, as in, if it wasn't for particularly, like, a lot of his work reflected his experience of mental health difficulties and of feeling lost and difficult family situations he had. He said, like, as in, it was that angst and that creativity that pushed and moved him on to create. In a more local context, there's people like creating communities of creativity, and this is actually the lady George Boyle, who some of you may have met if you were participating in the showcase last autumn. She spoke. She was our guest speaker. She was and is a prominent architect, but when the recession hit her as well back in 2008, things began to crumble. She lost her job. The firm she worked for completely went under. All of her colleagues lost their work, and they were kind of wondering, and it was awful. They had families. She had just literally had a baby 4 weeks before their firm folded. But once again, she took that moment, and she'd seen that power in community, so she thought, okay, we can create something here together. So she brought creative people together and said, we can create a space and we can make work together. Remember, this was the recession. There was no work going, but they could come together to create again. And so they established a place called the Fumbly Exchange. I'm actually a member myself. And in that space, they are now following on from the recession, following on from that recovery. They've built this remarkable community which features creative talent and who support each other, and they learn from each other. And once again, that thing would not have existed if that original challenge had not happened. They would probably still be in their architectural practices and having good jobs and stuff like that, but they wouldn't have been given that opportunity to create something radically different and just really interesting for people. And then my final example, just on kind of creativity out of adversity, and this is actually somebody kind of reflecting on the adversity facing the world. So Even and Iseult, they were two students in Trinity College, and they were working on their MA, I think, and their Masters, and they became aware of the crisis of food shortage and food waste in the world. So they saw these two problems. There's all these people going hungry, and there's all this food that's going into landfills and waste, and they're kind of going, they had such strong empathy, so they saw this challenge that was facing somebody else. So that's that's the challenge they drew on for their creativity, not necessarily something that was facing themselves, but something that was facing the world. And then they realized that they had this ability and power, so they had like as in the power of technology. So they decided, you know what, we're two young college students, but no one's going to say, no one's going to put us down just because we're young. And they said, we're going to come up with an app that would be able to solve this issue. So they created Food Cloud, which is a creative technology solution to basically make sure that food, and when food is being so it's not thrown out from Tesco, it's not thrown out from Dunn's, it's not thrown out from the big warehouses. Instead, it's redistributed to charities and families that need it. And now they just redistribute millions of meals every year to those who need it most. And they're actually working really hard right now during this current situation. So like that's the thing with all these examples, and I could go on for ages, because all of the people that I work with, they were facing either an adversity themselves, or they were looking at the adversity facing others, and that was what gave them their spark for creativity. That was where they were able to find that idea. And it always starts as an idea, it's a seed, and they took that and they did things like use some of the creative processes, which we'll cover further, to kind of take that idea and build it big. And like in one of my other projects I work with, they said, no good idea should go to waste. Like it's always kind of a case of taking something and nurturing it and using your talents in whatever way they are, but allowing yourself to find that core of an idea first, and then respond to that challenge and build something new and creative and wonderful out of it, and then end up in that new world where you've made the thing, you've written the poem, you've made the film, you've done something. And once again, it doesn't have to drastically shatter, it doesn't have to win Oscars, but basically we create to move ourselves and to move others. So once again, it's in building and learning and using the challenges to create the solutions that, it could be for one person, it could be for yourself, it could be for a community. We create within a context. And I always think that it's in these challenges that we find our power. I have been blown away by how people have been responding to this crisis. It's so difficult and it's so strange, but people are really stepping up. And it's in their own way, they're kind of finding their own maybe moments of resilience. Because don't worry, it's natural to kind of be blown back by a challenge. Like when I was describing that burglary scenario, I was crying when I walked in there, and I was in just awful way. And then looking at ways we can build back up from that. So it's totally normal to have a strong negative reaction to the challenge, but then we start to use creativity and processes to kind of find solutions. And that, I think, is something remarkably powerful. And I say it can be for yourself, it can be for one other person, or it could be for kind of communities. And that's some of the ideas and works that we might be looking to work on. So I think, let me just check. Yep, so I'd like to just take some questions there around kind of that creativity and adversity concept. Does anybody have anything? Once again, I'll be sending out some kind of some notes on that. I'll include the little case studies, and there's some other little talks that you might be interested in reading, but I just really wanted to put that context around that we are always kind of responding to challenge when we are creating. Who, in my opinion, was the most creative writer? I think everyone has different favourites. Who's the most creative writer? I'm a big fan of a guy called Douglas Copeland. But this is just a personal preference. I just think he famously wrote a book called Generation X, which was, once again, it was about kind of a shift in society, and I just think it's a marvelous book. But I mean, there's also people like Jack Kerouac, who was a member of the Beat Generation as well, who famously wrote On the Road, and it kind of inspired generations from there. But even if you look back in time, I think about, Mary Shelley, or, there's just some amazing writers out there, and we all have our own personal preferences. I don't think there's a most creative writer, but I think there's a lot of just really, really great. And this is a good time to pick up a book and read, as in there's some good stuff to be reading right now, and it's also that writers take you to places and they move you beyond the world we live in and into another one. So it can be that sort of, I think reading right now is a moment of self-care to kind of allow ourselves to be transported to a little bit of an alternate reality, because our current one it is challenging. Great. So what I'm going to do now is just come back. I just want to recap on the digital showcase just briefly. I've got another couple of minutes. So once again, just over the next couple of weeks, Adrienne, I'll put up. I think Adrienne is on the call with us. I'll just put up her introduction to self-talk next week, and then I'll be back to on the 16th of April with she to do the From Idea to Reality. So that's basically looking at kind of process and a framework to take our ideas through, and I'll be using examples from some of the ones, once again, that they are used when people are coming up with business ideas, but it's also a model that is used when people are workshopping stories, when they're thinking about movies, all that sort of thing. It's a process that just applies to creativity. So that'll be the one, and this is all captured on the web link that would have been shared with you. If you have any questions around kind of coming up with your own ideas, once again, I just want to come back to it. Those themes are meant to be loose. It's just kind of to give you a prompt if you need one. But if you've got some idea yourself, think about it. Like, I think, once again, everything relates to hope, creativity, strength. Like, as in, we'll just kind of find those strands. But once again, please think, I always say, think big, go big, come up with your own idea. And we'll kind of look at, as in how it connects. And I say, once again, you're all very busy. I know this, and you've got various webinars and tasks from college, so it can be what you do for this can be as big or small as you want. And you can also look at maybe looking at some of the work you're currently doing in the context. So maybe if you've got a project for college, let's look at it in the context of showcasing it. Because I suppose what we're doing here is the work that you're doing, but also how we kind of present and showcase it. And we'll talk to you further about kind of, once again, now that you've had a little bit of the session, maybe come back to think about yourselves in terms of your passions, your projects, your futures. Associate those strong words with yourself as well. And I say, Adrienne will be talking to you more about self-talk next week. So I'm just going to bring up that little so webinar 2. So at Adrienne Hayes. Basically, so Adrienne was going to do self-talk, and so once again, that's all about the internal dialogue that can move us forward or can drag us back. It's really related to all the things I've been discussing right now. It's going to be the focus of next year's webinar, and Adrienne will look at some tools and techniques to put you in control of your own self-talk. And once again, this is techniques that I use every day in my life, and kind of looking at kind of ways to frame and to help, and it's really great. We'll be building every week. We'll be building further and forward, and I think we'll have a good time. And like, once again, chat, feedback. Feel free to email us if you kind of want any particular things addressed, particularly in that creative process with my next session. And really, I hope we have some like a good time working on this. And once again, I've seen the sort of work that some of you guys come up with in the past, and it is great. And like, you're very talented, you're very capable, and like, we'll look at kind of making something really great with that digital showcase. And I do want to send that message out there that, look, as in, there's other people who are maybe struggling right now, and I think if they see this gang come together, putting together something in these times even, and we'll send it out to some of the partners who love to hear about the work of Not So Different and the work of yourselves, and I think it can have a really nice impact on people, I'm going to take any final questions there. Otherwise, we are almost at the hour. I was still learning how long a webinar actually goes for once you get into the content, but I'll just take a minute just to leave any final questions. And once again, please do send any questions or queries to Tony, Shan, Kerry, or Adele. And thanks very much for the lovely feedback, gang. So that's it.